running a little late, but I'm still going to go 29 minutes. I'm going to go 29 minutes. We've got Emma Gregg coming up after me. Incredible job by Gonzalo. Oh man, that was incredible. I'm also going to be asking everyone to slow down a little bit during this presentation too, because we're going to be talking about depression. It's going to be an artful approach to understanding and treating psychological depression. This is an important distinction versus biological depression. So for example, if a person comes to therapy, it's always a good idea to see when was the last time they had a physical, because sometimes there can be a biological reason for the feelings of depression. But I'm talking about psychological depression today. And here's my outline. And I'm going to preface this by saying also that there are a lot of useful perspectives out there today. There are a lot of different treatment approaches out there for depression. But aside from establishing sort of the general context, I'm more or less just going to focus on one artful approach we can take. We have some artists out here in the audience today, actually. So this is somewhat for you guys. So we've talked a little bit today about transpersonal psychology, but I'm gonna further define it for you guys, because you are at the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology, and I think it's important to sort of have a consensus about what that is. So trans comes from, transpersonal is a combination of two words in Latin, the first being trans, which means beyond or through, and persona, which is the mask or the public personality. So I'm gonna be requesting today that we look at depression more than just an individual phenomenon, but as something that exists out in the collective. The heart of my presentation, though, is going to be looking at some evocative pictures and a piece of music we're going to listen to. They're all designed to help sort of facilitate what it feels like to be depressed and what to do when the depression is there, because I'm going to be offering an alternative sort of approach to understanding and respecting and treating depression. I've got sort of two overarching hypotheses. The first one is that there is value in learning to consciously live with depression during times of depression. And the second hypothesis is that one can learn from others about how to live through depression, especially from artists. So these are people who I think more consciously grapple with the darker shades, the darker colors, sort of the gradations that aren't as noticed in this culture. But here's the problem. I'm going to lay some more context before we get into what I think is interesting. Interesting in the sense that we're going to look at some pictures, but it's important to understand the numbers. Depression currently affects over 121 million people worldwide. The economic costs are incredible. $83 billion in 2005 to treat people who were experiencing depression, including lost work time, all the way through medical treatment and up to depression-related suicide. In terms of how potentially dangerous depression is, between 10 and 30% of depressives and manic depressives eventually kill themselves, which surpasses even schizophrenia and alcoholism and lethality. So depression is definitely demanding our attention, and I'm giving it some attention today here. Let's look at some definitions. In other words, how is depression usually defined before I get into the spin that I'm going to put onto it? So, mainstream psychiatrists in America are taught that it is a condition of general emotional dejection and withdrawal, and that it involves sadness greater and more prolonged than that warranted by any objective reason. So, from this perspective, depression doesn't seem to make sense, and it's sort of basically understood as abnormal behavior as an acting out as a syndrome in need of a cure, and what's worse, an economic and emotional failure and threat. So you should be able to see what the problem is here, is people who adopt this definition for themselves, who are feeling down, might be likely to define themselves as failures, and also think that others see them that way too. You see, that's a serious problem, because the subjective experience of depression is hard enough on its own. So a little more context. What's usually implicated in the development of depression? Here are some common factors that I researched, talking about genetic predisposition, talking about birth experience, childhood traumas, personality, nutrition and lifestyle, substance abuse, capacity for insight, spiritual receptivity, and more. We could continue to generate, variables that are involved in its manifestation, but we haven't quite nailed it yet, I don't think. Fortunately, though, some researchers are developing more comprehensive definitions that include brain chemistry and consciousness considerations. I'm going to read this little quote here. They say, "Today our conception of depression is primed for another radical restructuring, one that retains enduring insights from mental and spiritual theories of past eras, while casting off their excesses. A new, more integrative paradigm is beginning to emerge, one that accepts both brain chemistry and consciousness as essential features of human existence, adding an eclectic spiritual perspective that draws on ancient, modern, and cross-cultural traditions to forge a contemporary technology of the sacred." So this is a pretty cutting-edge perspective on depression. So to me, it looks like we're making progress. We're sort of capturing more of the essence. And then the last context piece is sort of, what about treatment approaches? And then we're going to jump into the nitty-gritty here. Well, yeah, scientific approaches exist, certainly, and they have their place, and so do artful approaches. It's just the artful approaches aren't out in the public eye as often as they could be. So representing the artful side, Thomas More replaces depression with images of Saturn, both the planet and the Roman god of agriculture and justice. Let's take a look now. So we're going to start by looking at an image of Saturn. So here we are, a recent NASA photograph of the planet Saturn. And yeah, it appears cold, isolated, dark, and empty. You see, in his psychotherapy practice and in his writing, Thomas More poetically reaffirms what he calls the primeval role of Saturn. Here, the ancient archetype of life's somber side. The ancient archetype of life's somber side. Cold, isolated, dark, and empty. And here is Saturn's largest moon, Titan. NASA describes Saturn and its 62 moons as worlds of clouds and ice. Here's Saturn again. Of the 5 planets easily visible to the naked eye, Saturn is the most distant. Also metaphorically interesting is the fact that Saturn is the second largest planet in the solar system behind Jupiter. So given its stark characteristics and its incredible size, Saturn seems destined to play a major role in the lives of human beings. Let's go on now to look at how humans, with artwork, have attempted to represent Saturn. The text got a little jumbled there. Here's the Roman god Saturn. The Roman god Saturn. In ancient Roman religion and myth, Saturn was a major god presiding over agriculture and the harvest time. His reign was actually depicted as a golden age of abundance. Now, in medieval times, Saturn continued to be known as the Roman god of agriculture, but this time he took on the additional virtues of justice and strength. As you can see in this image, He holds a harvesting sickle in his left hand, or in his right hand in this case. Well, this is the sickle for harvest. It's on his back. Traditionally, it's shown to be held in his left hand. And then there's the wheat from the successful harvest in the right. But let's take a look at the more sort of directly challenging aspects of Saturn, which goes right into my hypothesis. Here is Francisco Goya's early 19th century Saturn Devouring His Sun. Completed between 1819 and 1823, Goya depicts the, this time, Greek myth of the Titan Cronus, who is known as Saturn to the Romans. Cronus, fearing that he would be overthrown by his children, ate each one upon their birth. So Saturn, or Cronus, related to our word for time, both eats its offspring through the natural cycles of time, and it prepares and sometimes painfully tills the soil for the next planting. Now, as Thomas More says, and he says, and I quote, "We can associate depression with literal aging, but it is more precisely a matter of the soul's aging." You see, if the aging process is denied or refused, the soul can become lost in an inappropriate clinging to youth. But in the end, no one escapes the clutches of Saturn. So instead of denying or refusing aging, which can feel like that at its worst, what are we to do? And this allowing depression, this is a yin rather than a yang approach, treatment approach. Yin being receptive, listening, allowing. Our culture tends to be more still yang, penetrating, figuring out, taking apart. And Moore recommends we allow depression. He says, instead of rejecting, we should allow our melancholy moments. Because these are the moments that may bring us to potential powerful sources of inner healing. And he says again, here I quote some beautiful words from Thomas More. "The soul presents itself in a variety of colors, including all the shades of gray, blue, and black. To care for the soul, we must observe the full range of all its colorings, white, and resist the temptation to approve only of white, red, and orange, the brilliant colors. Now, the bright idea of colorizing old black and white movies is consistent with our culture's general rejection of the dark and the gray. Yeah, in a society that is defended against the tragic sense of life, depression will appear as an enemy, an unredeemable malady. Yet, in such a society devoted to light, depression, in compensation, will be unusually strong." But Thomas More goes on and he says, "Care of the soul, therefore, requires our appreciation of these ways it presents itself. Faced with depression, we might ask ourselves, what are you doing here, Saturn? Say, what necessary role do you have here to play today? Even further, we may have to develop a taste for the depressed mood, a positive respect for its place in the soul's cycles." Take a look at this striking entryway. Thomas More believes that depression can become an initiation or a rite of passage to higher levels of self-realization and understanding. So look at this picture as I read a little bit from More again. And I think I define More as an artist who is able to capture this concept in a poetic way. That's why I'm choosing to share his words like this. So he says, "Some feelings and thoughts seem to emerge only in a dark mood. Suppress the mood, and you will suppress those ideas and reflections. Depression may be as important a channel for valuable negative feelings as expressions of affection are for the emotions of love. Feelings of love give birth naturally to gestures of attachment." Sure. In the same way, though, the void and grayness of depression evoke an awareness an articulation of thought that is otherwise hidden behind the screen of lighter moods. Melancholy gives the soul an opportunity to express a side of its nature that is as valid as any other, but is usually hidden out of our distaste for its darkness and bitterness. Rite of passage. So moving towards my conclusion now, I want to break Thomas More's poetry, his poetry, down into some actionable steps. Because really at heart, I'm a pragmatist. I like to know what to do, what steps to implement. And we can get these from Thomas More's work. So Thomas More suggests that when Saturn comes knocking, when one feels depressed, what can one do? One can, number one, we can invite Saturn in and say, oh, I see that you're here. Number two, we can create or find a dark or shaded and remote place where we can retire and enter into silence. Three, we can be honest in our relationships when we're feeling depressed. Four, we can honor Saturn by showing more honesty in the face of illness. We can honor Saturn by being honest about when we're feeling a little sick. And five, Moore suggests that we speak for and from the dark places. For and from the dark places. So now, while these steps, seem reasonable enough, before I ask you all how you appease Saturn, I'm going to demonstrate to you one approach that I take, which incorporates these steps. So for me, music helps me to go with the symptom. This is the way that I appease Saturn. I listen to melancholy music. That's one strategy. And it kind of makes sense, right? As Thomas More says, music provides a subtle way to enter gradually and more seriously into the mood. It's a pro-depressive action that does not indulge in the emotion, but takes it further, if only a short step further. So I'm going to give you a break from listening to my voice reading Thomas More, and I'm going to pass out some lyrics to a particular piece of music. Will you help pass these out? Yeah. I'll start with that. And I'm going to be playing a YouTube clip.
Thank you.
Just take a few of those. I'm going to be playing Andrew Lloyd Webber's The Music of the Night, because I think it does an excellent job capturing the feeling of melancholy, but also providing us with some concrete suggestions for what to do in those darker moods. But what I want you guys to do is, while we're listening to it, I want you to see and read through the lyrics while we're listening to it, and try to identify what Webber suggests that we do during these dark times, because it's in there, it's in the lyrics. Webber wants people to know about it too. And unfortunately, looks like we have about a minute of it loaded up. Let's get some of that far. Okay.
We can use Ethernet cable to see if we can get it faster. Shall we load it again?
I wonder if...
Just let me connect this and else. It's not advancing anymore, so
No.
okay.
That's that.
Can you restart?
Night.
No. Just like slow. Very good.
Great. Okay, sorry about that. So if I turn the lights off, it'd be too dark. Yeah. Okay.
Shall I turn off?
Time.
Okay, so yeah.
Maybe buffer.
Can you still see the lyrics if you...
Turn the wireless
Turn the
off.
wireless off.
Turn the wireless off.
And then it'll
Yeah.
have these in it.
Turn the wireless off?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. How would you do that?
I think if you
Be a
click on the
button on the
icon down at
laptop.
the bottom right hand part of the screen, that will,
Sure, sure.
you can usually turn.
Wait. Now we can just do it.
Yeah, load it up to the same spot.
I think that YouTube stopped loading all the way. I've noticed that lately. So it might be if you play it, it will continue to load.
You think it's buffering?
Night,
Can we just start it? Yeah, I suppose we can try it.
night. Time sharpens, heightens each sensation. Darkness stirs and wakes imagination. Silently the senses abandon their defenses. Slowly, gently, night unfurls its splendor. Grasp it, sense it, tremulous and tender. Turn your face away from the garish light of day. Turn your thoughts away from cold, unfeeling light, and listen to the music of the night. Close your eyes and surrender to your darkest dreams. Purge your thoughts of the life you knew before. Close your eyes, let your spirit start to soar, and you'll live as you've never lived before. Softly, deftly, music shall caress you. Hear it, feel it, secretly possess you. Open up your mind, let your fantasies unwind in this darkness which you know you cannot fight. The darkness of the music of the night. Let your mind start a journey through a strange new world. Leave all thoughts of the world you knew before. Let your soul take you where you long to be. Only then can you belong to me. Floating, falling, sweet intoxication. Touch me, trust me, savor each sensation. Let the dream begin, let your darker...
We could just read the rest of it. Let your darker side give in. Someone want to pick up the rest of it?
To the power of the music that I write, the power of the music of the night. You alone can make my song take flight. Help me make the music of the night.
Yeah. As if there's something out there that's in us, but it's out there that is asking us to connect when it shows up. So what did you guys notice in the lyrics there? What does Weber seem to suggest we do? in the darker moods,
Not feared.
to not be afraid.
To see it as a partner.
As a partner, yeah. A friend. What else?
To allow the sensations to expand.
To allow the sensations to expand, yeah.
Open up your mind, let your fantasies unwind.
Can be the seat of creativity, a source of incredible insight and work. Innovation comes out of these places.
To not numb yourself to the experience of the night or the darkness, but to be able to experience it.
Imagine that if, in the schools, children were taught to pay attention to the darker aspects of life here.
And you've put this into a context of art, and art being music in this case. And it's interesting that Lloyd Webber did not compose dark music. It is not an essentially morbid style of music. It's in fact operatic. That last high A on the B, that's an operatic sort of form. It comes up at that point in opera, when someone isn't dying yet.
I see. Well, something, yeah. Did you guys hear that? Yeah. Right. So if no one else wants to comment on the lyrics, I'll open for comments and questions now. I appreciate your attention. Yeah.
I was going to say that
Yeah.
it's an invitation to be open to the paradoxes in life. That you might find meaning not where you think you will find it, not where where there is a lot of light is not necessarily the place to find the deepest layers of meaning of being a human being.
It is paradoxical. I wondered today if I'd stand up here and smile at all while giving this presentation. I mean, why not? Yeah.
I do a lot of photographic work in a dark room, and so for me it's if you think about it just purely on that one level, I'm in the dark, and that's where I create my photographs. I find it's a very peaceful place to be, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for that comment. Yeah. Great.
I'm struck by a kind of a paradox with Saturn when you showed the image of the planet and the words that describe it: cold, isolated, frozen, and all those other words, and how there's a paradox because there's so much more in Saturn than meets the eye that just needs time to engage with. And I'm struck by the word Saturday. I think there's a connection with the name Saturday and Saturn and
Saturn Day.
Yeah, Saturn Day, and so what's the kind of symbolic purpose of Saturn Day in our week? Often it's the time when we step out of work. So is there a kind of an invitation to engage the Saturnine energies, as it were, on Saturday?
Yeah. Saturnine mood states. Yeah, but when I was describing the sort of attributes of Saturn, I made a point to enunciate it appears cold and dark, isolated and empty. Because that's why a lot of people turn away. And there's that fear piece. Yeah, because who knows what's in there? That's the beauty of it, in my opinion. Marie.
I guess of all the words in this song, the word unwind caught me, and how unwinding involves surrender, but in such a non-linear way. Excuse me.
Yeah, that's also cyclical. Yeah.
Or not. You can unwind all sorts of ways. something that is something that happens more easily in the dark.
Yeah. Jeannie, and then probably gonna wrap it up here then.
Well, something you just said about Saturn appears cold and all of those things, but it also is round. And so I think there's a tendency to look at our depression or somebody else's depression as cold and dark and kind of ugly. But if we use that metaphor of Saturn, then there's also a roundness, a wholeness there that we might be missing because we let our first impression, oh, it's cold, it's dark, she looks moody and down, and instead of seeing the wholeness that really is there, and maybe even because of the depression, if we're willing to step back and hold it, we might actually really see the wholeness that's there. Because now we're seeing that person whole. You know, they have good days, they have dark days, they have exceptional experiences, they have depression. And instead of focusing on, oh, you're healthy, you're whole. No, you can be healthy, appearing, and have 3 or 4 chronic illnesses. So I think the wholeness of Saturn, there's a message there that I want to remember.
I'm glad, yeah. Okay, folks, maybe one more. Then we have to give the room up to, we'll take a break and then give the room up. Gosh. I think it was Finbar I saw back there.
Ken hasn't spoken yet.
Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
Well, and this is of course your choice, but the question that just came up for me was this idea around artful experiences or artful approaches, and you have kind of been sort of mentioning a little bit of your own personal experience sort of on these edges, and I'm just curious about, you know, your artful approach. I know you mentioned listening to music, but it seemed like there was something else. I'm just curious, is there something else there for you? Like, what creative pieces come out of you as a result of taking an artful approach? And of course, it's your choice. I know this is a very personal question.
So, besides music, what else?
Right.
Is this sort of a pro-depressive action
Right.
that I engage in?
Right. Like, you know, march and protest, pro-depress, I don't know, like.
I mean, more and more, I've been taking sort of receiving postures instead of action. So, yeah, I've been reading some Sufi poetry. I've been singing. There's a karaoke place near my house, and I've been singing things like Paint It Black by Led Zeppelin. And Elvis Presley's got some nice melancholy stuff. Let's see. So music is a big part of my life, and it was since I was really young. And there'd been a number of years where I had sort of set it aside for more sort of intellectual pursuits, but I'm coming back to it now, and thank God. Yeah, because that helps me to feel, round and whole. So if anyone would like to sort of speak with me after, that would be great. But we're going to wrap this up so we can take a break and then come back at 3:30 for Emma.